She was supposed to walk home that day, but the world had already decided she wouldn't. That's how it begins. A normal street in Saitama, Japan. December 1988. Cold wind. School bag clutched tight. 17 years old. Junko Furuta, a girl who did everything right. Good grades, quiet, polite, the kind of soul you imagine will live a full, ordinary life. But that's not how this world works, is it? See, what happened to Junko wasn't just a murder. It wasn't just torture. It wasn't even just evil. It was a revelation, a glimpse into what happens when the masks fall off, when the structures we're taught to trust, society, parents, schools, police, all look the other way, not because they didn't know, but because they did. What I'm about to show you isn't just the darkest crime in modern Japanese history. It's the blueprint of societal rot, of how boys become monsters, of how silence becomes a weapon, of how a nation pretends to heal by forgetting. And most of all, how you're not as far from it as you think. Because this isn't just a Japanese story, it's a human one. A system failure that echoes in every country, every city, every hallway you've ever walked through without looking twice. The horror begins the moment you realize this. They didn't hide it very well. You were just never meant to look this close. The story isn't about gore. It's not about crime scene reports or sensationalism. This is about truth, the kind that leaves a burn mark on your soul. You see, Junko Furuta's murder wasn't the act of one twisted man. It was the product of a society that breeds apathy, glorifies dominance, and buries pain beneath politeness. A culture so obsessed with appearances, it lets its daughters scream behind closed doors until they fall silent forever. This series will show you the faces, but it will also show you the forces, because if you think monsters are rare, you haven't been paying attention. This is OBSCU are on. And this time, we don't look away. You think evil shows up with horns and a scream. No. Evil walks in with a school uniform, a smirk, a lie that sounds like a joke. It's the hand that taps your shoulder 1 second before pushing you into a nightmare. Junko didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know for boys. Hiroshi Nojo Ogira, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe were circling her life like vultures, waiting for the softest moment. And when it came, it was ordinary. One of them pretended to bump into her. He asked where she was headed, smiled, offered to walk with her, pretended to be a good guy. But behind that offer was a plan, not a spontaneous outburst. A ritual. Hiroshi was connected a low-level Yakuza affiliate, drunk on dominance and already sinking in a pool of psychopathic fantasy. He wanted to feel like a god. And in a world where boys aren't taught to channel their fire, they turn it on the innocent. That's what they did. They abducted Junko, drugged her, dragged her into a suburban house, not abandoned, but alive, with family, with neighbors. And no one said a word for 44 days. But this isn't where the horror starts. This is where the system chooses to look away. Because the first time parents filed a missing persons report, the police dismissed it. She probably ran away, they said. That's what they always say. When a young girl disappears, systems are trained to default to shame, to assume rebellion, to protect the order, not the victim. Inside that house, Junko was kept in a room like a cage, and outside, the world kept moving. Teachers kept teaching. The media stayed quiet. Her friends whispered rumors, but no one came. You know why? Because Japan, like many societies, is addicted to silence. Shame is more powerful than justice. Reputation is more sacred than truth. And the four boys knew that. They trusted the system to do nothing. They were right. Let me tell you something. Monsters don't thrive in chaos. They thrive in order, in predictable indifference. They knew the cops wouldn't investigate too deep. They knew neighbors wouldn't knock twice. They knew the family upstairs, one of the boy's own parents, wouldn't lift the floorboards to check. Because when you live in a society that rewards compliance and fears disruption, you make room for horror, and that's exactly what they did. So don't ask how this could happen. Ask why we keep designing systems that make it easy. What begins as a kidnapping becomes a theater of cruelty. But the real villain isn't just the four boys, it's the normalcy that surrounded them. It's the silence that fed them. It's the mask of order that covered the rot. And if you're thinking that only happens in faraway countries, faraway decades, you're already halfway down the spiral. The walls didn't bleed. The house didn't creak like in horror films. There was no thunderstorm outside, no cursed symbols scratched into the floor. There was only silence. And inside that silence, 44 days of degradation. Let me be clear, what happened to Junko Furuta cannot be softened, but it also must not be consumed like entertainment. This isn't a story to be watched. It is one to be felt, because it reveals something terrifying not just about those four boys, but about the systems that created them. They beat her, starved her, burned her. But more than that, they dehumanized her piece by piece, hour by hour. They made her apologize for bleeding. They made her thank them after being violated. They made her kneel while they laughed. This was not impulse. This was sustained power play, and it wasn't in the woods. It wasn't in the middle of nowhere. It was in a residential neighborhood, with windows, with walls thin enough for a cry to travel. But no one came. Not because they couldn't hear, because they didn't want to be involved. That's the infection. Apathy disguised as privacy. Fear of disruption disguised as respect. Let me tell you something that's been erased from the headlines. Junko escaped once, crawled, limped, made it out of that house while the boys were sleeping. She ran, found a telephone, called for help, but she didn't reach the police. She reached a civilian, a stranger. And when he heard her voice, broken, afraid, desperate, he didn't call authorities. He didn't run to her. He hung up because helping meant involvement, and involvement meant danger, and danger meant inconvenience. That call was her last chance. They found her minutes later, dragged her back, beat her until her bones snapped, until her stomach ruptured, until her body was too broken to run again. Let that settle. The worst things that happen on Earth, they don't happen in war zones. They happen next door. They happen in homes with curtains drawn and smiles on the front door dot, and they happen because we allow them to. This isn't about one murder. This is about what men become when systems reward silence, what boys become when dominance is taught without empathy, what families become when appearances matter more than what's real. And if you're waiting for the part where justice kicks down the door, you're not ready yet, because this rabbit hole, it only gets darker from here. Still with me. There's a truth they don't print in textbooks. Society doesn't protect the innocent, it protects the familiar. That's why what happened next will hollow you out. The four boys didn't hide her in a dungeon. They didn't live like fugitives. They partied every night, while Junko lay broken on the floor above them, bones shattered, spirit splintered, body rotting. They invited friends over, and some of those friends, they joined in. Yes, more than 30 people entered that house during those 44 days. Many saw her, some touched her, some left laughing. Not one called the police, because to them Junko wasn't a girl. She was a thing, an object of punishment, a symbol of what happens when you don't conform, or when you're just available in a system without honor. And the system was still quiet, still blind, still focused on preserving its own image. You see, the police in Japan at the time weren't incompetent. They were bureaucratic. They filed her disappearance as a runaway. Why? Because a missing schoolgirl is paperwork, but an abduction, that's scandal. And scandal shatters face. Something culture is built on reputation fear more than death. When Junko's mother kept calling, kept pleading, the officers gave her the same answer. She's probably with a boyfriend. She'll come home. She's just rebelling. Imagine knowing your daughter is out there, and the world tells you she chose this. That's not failure, that's psychological warfare. Now let me show you something darker. One of the boy's parents, the one who lived in the same house, knew. The mother knew. She brought meals upstairs. She heard screams, she saw blood, and did nothing. Why? Because Hiroshi told her she's my girlfriend. She's staying here by choice. And the mother, like the system, believed what was convenient, that this is how evil survives. Not through conspiracy, not through shadows, through permission, through the lies we choose to accept because they're easier than truth. You want to know how deep this sickness runs? They forced her to sleep in a freezer. They lit her legs on fire. They shattered her fingers with dumbbells. They urinated on her open wounds. They made her eat cockroaches and drink her own blood, and then they made her smile for them. This wasn't rage. This was ritualized dehumanization. This was boys pretending to be gods because no one stopped them. Because we live in a world where predators test the limits of the silence around them, and when no one resists, they push further. The real horror isn't what they did. The real horror isn't what they did. The real horror is how many others could have stopped it and didn't. Still think this is just a crime? Or are you starting to see the system? Let's go deeper. By now, if you feel something tightening in your chest, good. That's the part of you that still recognizes injustice before the world silences it. Let me take you deeper. Junko Furuta was no longer a person in that room. She was an altar, one the boys used to worship their own power. But it wasn't just sadism, it was conditioning. It was the exposure of how unchecked power mutates the male psyche. These weren't outcasts. They weren't monsters locked away in institutions. They were teenagers, popular, connected, laughing in school, hallways while her life evaporated upstairs. What they were doing wasn't a secret in their circle. It became a kind of currency, a way to prove dominance. And the sickest part, they filmed it. Yes, VHS tapes. They recorded the humiliation, the pain, the rituals, not to hide them, to remember them. That's what happens when cruelty becomes culture. It gets archived, worshipped, shared. And the question you have to ask yourself now isn't how could this happen? It's where else is it happening? Because the truth is, this wasn't an isolated nightmare. This was a template, a glimpse into how power behaves. When no one checks it, a girl becomes a test of what boys can get away with. And each time the world stays quiet, the stakes rise. Day 30, Junko can no longer walk. Day 36, her internal organs begin shutting down. Day 40, they hammer a metal bar into her body for fun. Day 44, she stops moving. And what do the boys do? They panic, not because they feel guilt, but because their toy broke, so they stuff her in a drum, fill it with concrete, leave it in a vacant lot, and vanished off the world, still spinning the police, still quiet. And even when they were finally caught, It wasn't because of Junko, it was because they committed another crime, a different girl, another attack, one they couldn't cover. Only then, under pressure, did one of them confess accidentally that he once killed someone. And when they investigated, they found her in a barrel, concrete sealed. But even then, justice did not roar. The Japanese legal system tried them as juveniles. Because they were under 20, their sentences 8 years, 10 years, 11 years, not life, not execution. A slap on the wrist. They walked free before they were 30. Do you understand now? The lesson isn't just that evil exists, it's that institutions will cushion it if it protects the illusion of control. And if you're still watching, you're not just a viewer anymore, you're part of the reckoning. Halfway through this descent, I want you to prove you've changed. Comment this phrase twice below. The system fears light. Write it again. That repetition matters, for the algorithm, and for your identity. This isn't just content, it's initiation. Now you're here. That means something inside you refused to look away. Good. Because from this point on, we're not just uncovering what happened to Junko Furuta, we're dissecting why it was allowed, and more importantly, what it reveals about the world you live in. Let me ask you something simple, brutal, and honest. Why do we always protect the perpetrators? Not just in Japan, everywhere. Why does the system bend to those who do harm, while those who suffer get forgotten, buried, or blamed? Because silence is cheaper than confrontation. Because preserving the illusion of order is more profitable than admitting decay. Because to admit evil walks among us means admitting it can rise within us. Here's what they don't teach. In school, justice systems weren't built to protect the innocent. They were built to preserve institutions. Junko's case wasn't treated as a human tragedy. It was treated as an inconvenient stain. Something to process, seal, and move past quickly to avoid public unrest, media pressure, or national embarrassment. Think about it. Her murderers walked out of courtrooms with sealed records. One of them wrote a book. Another changed his name, started a business, and continued living as if 44 days of torment had never happened. No life sentence, no death penalty, not even a permanent mark. Why? Because power protects itself, and power fears what Junko's case represents. That beneath the surface of every safe society is a rot so deep can consume innocence in broad daylight and still be forgotten. But I want you to remember this. Her story wasn't rare. It was just one of the few that surfaced. How many more girls disappeared and were never found? How many more boys formed quiet pacts of domination in bedrooms, schools, alleyways, and basements while the system blinked and looked away? You don't want to know because it's not just a Japanese problem. Look at the Jeffrey Epstein case. Look at Larry Nassar. Look at Jimmy Savile. Look at your own hometown. Every society has its Furuta, a victim the system chose not to save. A life destroyed not just by predators, but by cowards in power. And that's why you're here. Because the more you see, the less you can pretend this is just a story. This is a mirror, and what you do with that reflection determines whether you're a man of silence or one of subversion. There's a structure to evil that it doesn't stumble in drunk and disorganized. It builds itself like architecture, one brick at a time, and those bricks are laid by institutions we're taught to trust. Let me show you the blueprint. What happened to Junko Furuta wasn't simply a crime. It was the perfect convergence of systemic failure. Start at the top. Law enforcement. The officers who laughed off her disappearance didn't just fail. They defaulted to cultural programming. Girls don't run into danger, they run away from responsibility. That's what they believed. That's what they were trained to assume. Missing teenage girl. To them, that wasn't an emergency. It was a statistic, a burden, a low-priority case that might go away on its own. Now go deeper. The legal system. Japan's post-war penal code treats offenders under 20 as juveniles, protects their identities, seals their records. It doesn't matter what they did. It doesn't matter how long the suffering lasted. The system wasn't built to confront horror, it was built to preserve control. And control means minimizing scandal. Even after Junko's killers were caught, they weren't unmasked. Their names were initially hidden. Why? Because publicizing their identities would ruin their future. Let that echo in your head for a second. Her future was erased. Their future protected. That's not justice. That's institutional cowardice. Peel back another layer. The community. What about the parents, the neighbors, the classmates who suspected something but said nothing? That's not just indifference. That's manufactured obedience. Because from a young age we are trained subtly, constantly, to prioritize order over truth, to stay in our lane, to mind our own business, to protect our image. And that's exactly how systems want it. Because when people stop questioning, when bystanders become background noise, when men choose silence over confrontation, the machine runs smoothly. This is how entire nations cover up abuse. This is how cults grow inside corporations. This is how predators wear uniforms, robes, and badges and no one asks questions. Because the architecture of systemic evil isn't made of bricks, it's made of habit. And once enough people adopt that habit, darkness doesn't have to hide anymore, it walks in broad daylight, smiling. If you've ever wondered how evil survives in the modern world, This is your answer. It doesn't need chaos, it just needs compliance. And if you're still watching, you're not here for spectacle. You're here to learn how to see it, to break it, to refuse it. You've made it this far because something inside you refuses to sleep. Good. Because now we stop talking about them. Now we talk about you. See, the most dangerous part of systemic evil isn't the brutality. It's the way it slowly teaches you to look away. We live in societies built on behavioral architecture, invisible systems designed not only to manage action, but to shape attention. Ask yourself this: why didn't Junko's neighbors intervene? Why didn't the boy's own parents stop it? Why didn't the classmates call the police? Because the system didn't need to threaten them. It had already programmed them. They were trained from childhood to avoid confrontation, to fear shame, to distrust emotion, to obey structure, and most of all, to outsource responsibility. They didn't have to be evil, they just had to be normal. And this is where it gets personal. You've been conditioned the same way. Maybe not by Japan, maybe not by a case like Junko's, but by your own culture. Whether it's the USA, the UK, Germany, or anywhere else. Think about it. You see a man hit a woman in public. Your gut says to intervene, but your brain says, don't get involved. You hear a child screaming in the apartment next door. Your instinct says knock, but your training says, not my problem. You scroll past injustice on your screen, violence, abuse, corruption, and deep down, you know it's real. But you click away, because you've been trained to treat truth like content, not reality. That's how the architecture lives inside you. Not as hatred, not as cruelty, but as numbness. Let me be clear, this isn't your fault. You were raised in it, groomed by it, taught by schools that reward obedience over questioning, governed by institutions that punish whistleblowers more than criminals, immersed in media that numbs the mind and sterilizes the soul. You were sculpted to adapt, and in a broken system, adaptation means becoming blind. But blindness is a choice now, not an excuse, because once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And now that you're here this far down the spiral, you're standing at a fork. You can close this video, compartmentalize the horror, and go back to normal.org. You can keep watching. You can use this story to pain, not as entertainment, but as initiation, into clarity, into confrontation, into transformation. Because evil is not just the things we do, it's the things we allow. And Junko's death, it wasn't just caused by monsters, it was made possible by good people who did nothing. Let's strip away the illusion. You've been told your whole life to be a good man, hold doors open, pay your taxes, smile politely, stay out of trouble. But what if I told you that's the most dangerous role of all? Let's talk about the myth of the good man. The boys who murdered Junko Furuta, they weren't born with knives in their hands. They laughed, they played sports, they had girlfriends. In many ways, they looked exactly like the boys you grew up with, you know. Why? Because the world doesn't raise monsters by mistake. It builds them from silence, from reward systems, from power without discipline. And in that same world, it raises good men to become spectators, to obey, to avoid discomfort, to hold their head down and their tongue still while horror plays out next door. That's how darkness survives, not by recruiting villains, but by keeping good men tamed. So ask yourself, if you had lived next to Junko's prison, would you have called the police? If you saw the boys dragging her inside that day, would you have intervened? If you heard the screams through the wall, would you have knocked? Or would you have told yourself what every good man tells himself? It's not my business. I don't want to get involved. Someone else will handle it. But they did know when no one did. Because the good men were asleep. The myth of the good man is this, that morality is passive, that if you do nothing, you're still good. But silence is not neutral. Silence is a vote, and every time a man stays silent in the face of suffering, he casts his vote for the system to continue. That's why Junko's story matters. Not just because of the cruelty, but because of the echo it leaves in every hallway, every apartment building, every online feed where suffering still happens. And no one stands up. So if you're here to feel bad and move on, this isn't the channel for you. But if you're here to confront yourself, to destroy the programming that made you comfortable with injustice, then keep going, because real men, awakened men, don't find comfort in horror. They respond to it, they use it, they rise. This is not a tribute to Junko. This is a weapon forged from her name. Let me tell you how they break you before you even know you have power. It starts early in classrooms, in living rooms, in locker rooms and dinner tables. Not with violence, but with subtle messages disguised as rules, rewards, and routines. You're taught to be polite, to be quiet, to not make trouble. You're told that obedience equals goodness, that compliance is maturity, and that questioning authority is dangerous. They don't need chains when they've already trained your mind. This is psychological control. A system so embedded, so normalized, you grow into it thinking it's your own choice. They don't just raise you to avoid evil, they raise you to avoid confrontation. That's why when you see something wrong, your first instinct is hesitation. Your brain flashes through options, consequences, risk. You weigh the moment, and in that hesitation, evil walks past you, unchallenged. That's how Junko's torture continued for 44 days. Every layer of society, every adult, every friend, every neighbor, every officer had a moment where they sensed something was off, but they were too well trained to act. Their instincts had been overwritten on by structure, by habit, by the lie that someone else will do something. And that lie is still alive in you, in me, in the world we walk through. It's in the way you scroll past violence on your feed. It's in the way you feel that split second of guilt and then swipe anyway. It's in the way your voice lowers when you speak an uncomfortable truth because you were taught that silence keeps you safe. But safe from what? From pain, from shame, from conflict, or from transformation. Because make no mistake, standing up against a broken system changes you. It isolates you. It marks you. It sets you apart. And that's exactly why most men choose comfort over courage. They don't want to be outcasts. They want to be accepted, even if it means being complicit in silence. But I'll tell you this, the system doesn't fear your outrage. It fears your awakening. That it fears the moment you stop asking permission to speak. The moment you stop trusting its version of truth. The moment you stop calling yourself a good man and start becoming a dangerous one. Dangerous to what? To lies. To predators, to rot, dressed up as order. That's what Junko's story offers, if you're willing to feel it instead of watch it. A mirror, a fire, a weapon. Let me rip the curtain back. You've seen how the world failed Junko Furuta, not through chaos, but through design, through structures, through silence. Now you need to understand something even more uncomfortable. Those same structures are working on you, right now, every day. Not to destroy your body, but to control your mind. It starts with how you're taught to see yourself from birth. They tell you who you are, your name, your nationality, your religion, your school. They program identity into you, not as a tool, but as a container. And the moment you try to step outside that container, punishment. Not with whips, but with shame, with exile, with subtle reminders that deviation is dangerous. The system doesn't need to kill you to control you. It only needs to convince you to stay small. Think about the things you've been discouraged from doing. Speaking up when the room is silent, asking uncomfortable questions, rejecting groupthink, calling out injustice when everyone else is pretending it isn't there. You were taught to survive by complying, by blending in, by learning what not to say. But what if I told you that silence wasn't protecting you? What if it was reprogramming you? You see, the system doesn't just want you passive, it wants you self-policing. It wants you to question your own instinct, to doubt your gut, to hesitate when your soul says act. That's how real power operates, not through dictatorship, but through invisible conditioning. The same psychology that kept Junko's neighbors quiet is the same psychology that keeps you from confronting what matters in your own life. You felt it before. The moment you knew something was wrong but said nothing. The moment you saw the truth but chose comfort over clarity. The moment you watched the world fall apart and told yourself, it's not my problem. That's not weakness, that's programming. And if you don't unlearn it, you'll never be free, because the system doesn't care if you're angry. It only cares that you're obedient, and the man who obeys while knowing the truth, he becomes his own jailer. But there's something they didn't plan for. The man who sees the program can rewrite it, can use that awareness to build strength. Instead of submission, fire instead of fear, action instead of apathy. You're not here by accident. You're here because something in you refuses to stay asleep. So the question is, what are you going to do with this fire? It's not just Japan. The blueprint that erased Junko Furuta, that silenced her screams and protected her murderers, it exists in every nation, every institution, every corner of the modern world. What happened to her wasn't a Japanese phenomenon. It was a human systems failure, replicated across borders. Let me show you how it spreads. Start in the United States. Thousands of women and children vanish every year. Many never make the news. Why? Because media coverage is based on algorithms of marketability, not morality. A missing white teenager in a wealthy suburb. Headline: a missing black girl from the inner city. A footnote: if that. The same silence, the same bias, the same erasure. Now look at the UK. Jimmy Savile, a man who molested hundreds of victims for decades in hospitals, in studios, on national television. Not hidden, protected. The BBC knew, the staff knew. The police had reports but chose not to act, because Savile was famous, because the institution came first. Just like the Saitama police put their reputation over Junko's life. The BBC shielded a predator to protect its brand. This is not cultural, it's systemic. Next, the Catholic Church. Thousands of cases of child abuse. Across continents, priests relocated instead of prosecuted, records buried, victims gaslit. Not one country, all of them, because when an institution becomes sacred, truth becomes treason. This is the core pattern. A crime is committed, the system recognizes it, and instead of stopping it, it smothers it to preserve the lie, to protect the illusion of order. And while the headlines focus on monsters, the real machine stays untouched. The predator is replaced, the structure remains. Do you see it now? Every nation has its Junko. Every country has its house of silence. Every system has its rituals of forgetting. And the same tools are used over and over. Denial, delay, discrediting the victim, redirecting attention, restoring the image. That's the playbook. It works because most people want to believe the lie more than they want to face the truth, because truth means responsibility, and responsibility means risk. That's why they hope you keep scrolling, why they want your outrage to be brief, emotional, and unproductive. Because if you ever saw the full pattern, and worse, if you ever acted on it, you'd become a threat. You wouldn't just be a viewer, you'd be a disruptor, and that's the most dangerous thing you can be in a controlled world. You're still here. Good. Because this is where the real deception begins, not with violence, not with torture, not even with silence, but with storytelling. Let me show you how the media, the screens you trust, the voices you follow, have been weaponized to control your reactions. You live in an age where you see more suffering in 1 week than your ancestors saw in a lifetime. Videos of violence, images of war, stories of abuse. And what do they make you do? Feel but not act. That's the trick. They don't need to silence you. They just need to keep you reacting, scrolling, crying, outraged, and then gone. The modern media machine is not here to inform you, it's here to deactivate you. Because the more you consume suffering without purpose, the less power you believe you have. Every time you see a story, like Junko's, brutal, devastating, real, it hits you like a wave. And the system counts on that wave to crash and recede. Because a man overwhelmed with emotion is easier to manipulate than a man who's focused on truth, so they flood your feed with tragedy, but give you no tools, no context, no pathway out, just outrage, then silence. That's the cycle. And it's not accidental, it's strategic. See, the media learned something decades ago. Attention is power, but focused attention, that's revolution. So they splinter your focus, give you 5 seconds here, 10 seconds there, a video of a girl being rescued, then a meme, then an ad for something you don't need, then a headline that makes you angry, followed by one that makes you laugh. It's a carousel of contradiction, and slowly, you become numb, not because you don't care, but because you've been taught to feel without direction. This is what they did to Junko's memory. For decades, her story was reduced to a shock value headline, a Reddit thread, a creepy YouTube video with sad music, and black and white photos, but no one told you what really mattered. That her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a case study in societal collapse, a symbol of what happens when media narrates pain but hides systems. They show you the blood, but never the blueprint. They show you the corpse, but never the corridor it walked through. Because if you saw the system clearly, you'd start asking questions like, who's benefiting from the silence? Who decides what stories we forget? And who's next if nothing changes? And they can't afford for you to ask those, so they drown you in noise, but you're still here. Which means you're not just watching this, you're studying it. They don't need to break your body, they just need to dismantle your habits, because habits are where your real power lives. And the system knows if it can shape your routines, it can shape your reality. Let's look at how that happens. You wake up, what's the first thing you touch? Your phone, not your breath, not your purpose, not the silence that could build your clarity, but a screen. And before your feet hit the ground, your mind is already crowded. Notifications, noise, scrolling, 1,000 voices before you've even formed one of your own. This is not random, it's by design. They've trained you to feed on distraction, to be addicted to reaction cycles, to spend your time watching others move instead of building your own motion, and that passivity becomes identity. You start to believe that you're not supposed to act, that you're just here to witness the world fall apart, not to interrupt it. That's what they want. Because a man with fractured habits becomes a man with fractured will, and if your will is broken, they can sell you anything, they can tell you anything, they can lead you anywhere and you'll follow, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to avoid resistance. Every scroll, every click, every delayed decision builds that pattern deeper. Discomfort equals avoid, truth equals too heavy, power equals for someone else. That's not just laziness, that's installation. They've installed routines into your day that drain your fire. Comfort eating, comfort scrolling, comfort silence. You don't speak your truth, you don't challenge the people around you, you don't build. You consume. And consumption without action, it turns kings into slaves. Let me ask you something raw. How many hours have you spent this month feeding the machine? Now ask, how many have you spent training, learning skills, building discipline, confronting your fears, speaking dangerous truths? You see the imbalance now. This isn't about motivation. This is about warfare. Psychological, spiritual, habitual. Because every moment you waste on distraction is a moment you're not becoming dangerous, not becoming disciplined, not becoming the man who would have kicked down that door, dragged Junko out, and burned the whole system that held her. But here's the key. Habits can be broken, rebuilt, weaponized, and that's what we do next. Welcome to the war. You didn't choose this battlefield, but you've been living in it your whole life. And if you're still here, watching, listening, absorbing, it means one thing: you're ready to stop being controlled. Now we begin the reprogramming, the return to your original power, the part of you that the system tried to bury beneath routine, fear, and false comfort. Let's dismantle it one pattern at a time. First, the morning. If they own your morning, they own your mind. Before the world screams into your ears, you take the silence back. You wake without touching your phone. You sit, breathe, feel your edges. You speak your name aloud, not the one society gave you, but the one you choose. You write one line: "Today, I do not obey." You see, rebellion doesn't begin with a protest. It begins with a presence the machine cannot penetrate. Second, the body. Weak men obey. Strong men bend systems if they keep you soft. They keep you docile, so you train not to impress, not for vanity, but because pain is memory. Every rep, every drop of sweat, every surge of breath is a reminder. You are not a spectator. You are a force. And the body, once hardened, becomes a vessel for command. Third, the mind. Here's a truth they will never put in a textbook. You were born to think like a weapon, not a prisoner. So each day you read what the system hides. You seek what it fears. You ask questions it punishes. And the more they try to distract you, the sharper your focus becomes. Because now you know. Distraction is control. Discipline is rebellion. Fourth, the voice. They want you silent, neutral, pleasant. Passive, you speak anyway. You say the things others fear. You point at rot and name it. You learn to live with confrontation because you are no longer afraid of it. You speak like a man who remembers. Junko Furuta screams and refuses to be the one who stays silent ever again. Fifth, the brotherhood. You cut out weakness, the fake friends, the cowards, the enablers. You surround yourself with men who sharpen steel, not dull it. You create allies, not audiences. And you make sure they're doing the same work or they don't stand beside you, because the battlefield isn't metaphor, it's memory, it's habit. It's today. You are not just escaping the system. You are becoming its enemy. They don't just want you weak, they want you alone, because a weak man can still dream of rising. But a lonely man, a man cut off from others, that man is easy to control because he has no one to rise with. This is the final layer of the system's architecture, isolation by design. Understand this: power doesn't fear outrage, it doesn't fear protest. It fears unity, because when men connect, they share knowledge. When men bond, they build resistance. And when men rise together, the system begins to shake. So what does the machine do? It poisons connection. It trains you to see every other man as competition, not a brother, not an ally, but a threat to your pride, your resources, your image. Think about your upbringing. How often were you taught to be vulnerable with other men? How often were you allowed to say, "I'm lost," or "I'm angry," or "I saw something wrong and I didn't know what to do"? You weren't, because masculinity was framed not as power, but as performance, and performance demands silence. You were taught, don't ask for help, don't share your fear, don't connect, compete. But that training wasn't about strength, it was about division, because if they divide men, they dilute their impact. They make every man feel like he's suffering alone, like his thoughts are crazy, his instincts are wrong, and his resistance is futile. And this isolation breeds more than weakness, it breeds invisibility. That's what happened to Junko, a neighborhood filled with men, but none of them saw each other. None of them acted together, because each one thought, it's not my business, it's not my place. But what if they had connected? What if 2, 3, 5 men had gathered and knocked on that door? Would she still be alive? You see now, the system isn't just a government, it's a psychology. And that psychology thrives when you believe you're alone, but you're not. This space, this very moment proves that. There are other men hearing these words, feeling that fire in their chest, remembering everything they forgot they were capable of. But you are not an outcast, you are an awakening point in a global brotherhood the system hoped would never form. So, now the question is, will you remain a watcher or will you build? Will you stay isolated? Or will you connect with those who feel what you feel and sharpen each other into steel? You want to control a man, you don't need chains, you don't need guns, you just need to erase his memory. Because when a man forgets where he comes from, when his past is stripped, twisted, rewritten, he becomes a drifter in his own. Life easily molded, easily led. This is the war of legacy manipulation, and brother, it's been raging for centuries. See, Junko Furuta's story was not just hidden because it was painful. It was hidden because it exposed something ancient, something every empire, every institution fears. The truth that civilization is built not on justice, but on erasure. Let's look at the playbook. Step 1. Isolate the event. Treat it like an exception, a one-time horror, not part of a pattern. Step 2. Strip it of context. Don't ask how it happened. Don't ask why no one stopped it. Just frame it as evil exists, as if that answers anything. Step 3. Mutilate the memory. Turn the victim into a footnote, a curiosity, a creepy true crime headline with sad piano music and moody filters. But never ever talk about the system. That's how they killed Junko's memory. Not once but twice. The first time with fists, fire, and chains. The second time with silence, spin, and forgetting. But this isn't just about her. This is about how you've been disconnected from your ancestors. Do you know the real history of your lineage? Of your land? Of your blood? Or have you only been fed the versions scrubbed clean for textbooks, for movies, for PR campaigns? They don't want you to know about the real men who resisted. the ones who challenged empires, the ones who tore down kings, the ones who built secret schools, sacred rituals, survival networks under the eyes of tyranny. Because if you knew what kind of strength you came from, you'd stop asking permission to speak. You'd stop bowing to modern morality. You'd stop thinking of yourself as a consumer of history and start living as a continuation of it. And that's why every system, from religious orders to governments to corporate machines, fights for control of the narrative. Because if they can control your past, they can define your future. But you're here now and you're beginning to see the lies of this story. Junko's horror is not an isolated wound, it's part of a legacy war. And once you recognize that, your memory becomes dangerous because it starts to connect, to awaken, to remember. You are not a random man in a random era. You are a link in a chain they tried to break. But the chain still holds. They buried it beneath wars, beneath religions, beneath flags, media, schools, and contracts. They didn't burn all the books, just the right ones. They didn't kill every rebel, just the ones who knew too much. They didn't erase every truth, only the ones that could wake you up. This is the forbidden blueprint, how ancient systems of power erased entire generations, and how you begin the resurrection of your true memory. Let's go back, way back, before empires, before the system wore suits and preached democracy. There was a time when men knew their bloodlines, not in DNA kits, but in oral histories, carved stones, sacred symbols passed from mouth to mouth, hand to hand. They knew who their fathers were and what their fathers stood for. They knew the tribes they came from, the wars they survived, the rituals that shaped them into men. And because of that memory, they were unshakable. They couldn't be bored. They couldn't be distracted. They didn't scroll, they watched. They didn't consume, they built. And then the erasers came. Priests, governors, missionaries, colonizers, professors, politicians. Politicians, they didn't say, forget who you are. They said, we'll teach you who you are instead. And the world was rewritten. Tribal leaders became barbarians, wise women became witches, warriors became terrorists, resistors became criminals, and the men of the future you were taught to look back and feel shame instead of pride. They told you your ancestors were savages, primitive, ignorant, too emotional, too violent, too raw. But what they were was free. And that freedom rooted in memory was the greatest threat to empire, because a man who remembers his true history cannot be programmed. So how do you restore what they erased? Start small, start dangerous, start real. Study the parts of history they skip in school. Read the banned books. Ask your elders what they weren't allowed. With your speak up, trace the symbols, rituals, and mythologies that predate modern institutions. Reclaim your origin story, not the sanitized one, but the blood and fire version they don't want you to touch. Because once you remember what you were, you'll stop tolerating what you've become. You were not born to be a passive consumer. You were not born to be a silent observer. You were born into a warrior lineage, one they tried to domesticate. And Junko's death is one more scar in the war to make you forget. But you're not forgetting anymore. You're remembering. Say it out loud. Right now in the comments, I remember, twice. One for the world you were trained to forget. One for the man you were born to become. Here's the door they never wanted you to find. Behind it lies the engine, not the individuals, but the elite networks that profit from silence, decay, and your programmed obedience. You want to know why nothing changes? Because behind every injustice, there's someone earning from it. Junko Furuta wasn't just failed by individuals, she was a victim of systems designed to absorb horror and quietly monetize it. Yes, even her death generated value. Police saved face. Politicians protected image. Media harvested clicks. And the elite, they stayed invisible, untouched, insulated. That's how power survives in the modern age. Not with guns, not with dictators, but with layers. Layers of bureaucracy, layers of media filters, layers of plausible deniability. They build walls of narrative so high, by the time the truth reaches you, it's been diluted, distorted, disarmed. Let's be clear, power isn't random, it's networked. Interconnected webs of influence, government, media, finance, tech, all operating under one rule. Preserve the machine. You want proof. Follow the flow. Why do whistleblowers get punished harder than abusers? Why do politicians smile in front of cameras after ignoring human suffering for years? Why do corporations put out PR statements about mental health while selling you the very poisons that destroy it? Because morality isn't profitable, but numbness is, obedience is, distraction is. And the elites, they build their castles from. You're forgetting. When a girl like Junko is silenced, they win twice. Once by ensuring the system doesn't change, and again by making you believe it was just a tragedy. But it wasn't a tragedy, it was a ritual, a quiet public execution, not just of a girl's life, but of society's willingness to act. And now you understand, every time a system allows suffering and calls it a glitch, every time justice is delayed until it's no longer relevant, that's not failure, that's design. They feed off the decay. And the more disconnected you are from truth, from brotherhood, from your own fire, the easier it is to feed you into the machine. But now you're seeing it. the hidden web, the elite hands, the polished predators behind the curtains. And that makes you dangerous because once you name parasite, you can remove it. They called it ethics, they called it morality, but what they really taught you was obedience. Let's rip the mask off. In modern institutions, from universities to corporations, from churches to governments, you are not being educated, you are being shaped. Shaped to obey authority, to accept contradictions, to follow rules that serve the machine, not the soul. You've heard it your whole life, be respectful. Don't question the process. That's just how it is. You can't say that here. And beneath all of it is the same unspoken rule: stay inside the line or we erase you. This isn't morality. This isn't justice. This is behavioral programming. They've convinced you that being good means being harmless, but the truth is darker. The more obedient you become, the less dangerous you are, and the more useful you are to the very forces that feed on your silence. They taught you to bite your tongue when the truth feels sharp, to lower your voice when your blood runs hot, to make your edge palatable, to dull the blade of your soul. That's not ethics, that's emasculation, because if you confuse politeness with virtue, if you think submission is maturity, if you believe that to be moral is to avoid conflict, you're already wearing the collar they built for you. Let me make this clear. Real ethics means facing evil even when it's inconvenient. It means protecting the powerless, not protecting your reputation. It means saying what must be said, even if it costs you your job, your friends, your comfort, your illusion. And real morality, it isn't about being liked, it's about being clean with yourself. When everyone else has sold their conscience for comfort. You think Junko's neighbors stayed silent because they were evil? No, they stayed silent because they thought silence was ethical. They didn't want to jump to conclusions, didn't want to accuse someone without proof, didn't want to cause problems. So they watched a girl disappear, heard the screams, did nothing, and their morality became murder. This is what the system does. It builds men who are so polite, so passive, so concerned with being civil, that they let hell rise around them just to avoid being called rude. But not you, not anymore, because now you see it. Every institution that taught you to be nice was really teaching you to be neutral, even in the face of evil. Neutrality is not wisdom, it is collusion. And once you reject their fake morality, you become something the system cannot predict. Untouchable. They tried to bury it, but it still pulses deep beneath the noise, beneath the softness, beneath the culture that trains men to smile while the world burns. I'm talking about the sacred, masculine. Not the parody you've been sold, not the toxic extremes they parade on your screens, but the real thing, the ancient elemental force that once stood like a wall between innocence and destruction. You want to know what they feared most? Not angry men, not violent men, but disciplined, conscious, honorable men who carried the warrior code in their blood and refused to kneel to corruption. Men who felt deeply but didn't flinch. Men who saw clearly and still ran into the fire. The kind of man who, upon hearing Junko scream behind those walls, would have ripped them open. Not because it was legal, not because it was safe, but because it was right. You've been told that masculinity is dangerous, and they're correct. Real masculinity is dangerous to tyrants, predators, and systems of control. Because the sacred masculine doesn't wait for permission. He protects, he confronts, he builds, he destroys when necessary and rebuilds from the ashes. But they couldn't control that kind of man, so they started to neuter the code. They told boys, don't be too rough, don't talk back, don't make her uncomfortable, don't be so intense. What they really meant was, don't be powerful, don't be sovereign, don't be awake. They taught you to fear your own fire, to apologize for your instincts, to second-guess your strength, and if that didn't work, they ridiculed it, laughed at alpha males, mocked protectors as toxic, reduced warriorhood to a cartoon. But you feel it, don't you? That ancient code humming in your bones. It's not dead, it's dormant. And now, in this moment, as you look into the abyss of what happened to Junko Furuta, that code is waking up, because her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a summons, a reminder of what happens when good men are too domesticated to confront evil, when warriors turn to watchers, when protectors turn to pacifists. But the tide is turning, and the sacred masculine is rising, not with recklessness, but with ruthless clarity. Not with arrogance, but with unshakable boundaries. You were never meant to obey. You were meant to hold the line between chaos and order, between predator and prey, between silence and justice. That's the kind of man who would have broken that door. That's the kind of man who leaves no scream unanswered. And that's the kind of man the system cannot handle. You've been told to calm down, to breathe through the rage, to count to 10, to let it go, to smile when your soul is burning. But listen to me and listen well. Your anger is sacred. The world wants to medicate it. Your boss wants to suppress it. Your culture wants to mock it. But anger is not the enemy. Cowardice is, because when anger is left aimless, yes, it can destroy. But when it's refined, when it's forged, it becomes a weapon of purpose. You feel it, don't you? That heat in your chest when you hear about Junko Furuta, the injustice, the silence, the unbearable cruelty wrapped in apathy and politeness, and just following orders. That rage is not dysfunction. It is your soul refusing to stay asleep. And the moment you suppress it, the moment you pretend it doesn't matter, that's when the machine wins, because that fire, that's your line in the sand. That's the ancient part of you that knows. There are things that must never be tolerated, lines that must never be crossed, innocence that must never go unprotected. You see, the elites want docile men, obedient men, men who say, well, what can I do, and scroll on. But you're not that man. You wouldn't be here if you were. Now, here's the truth. They don't want whispered, let alone shouted. Controlled anger is clarity. It sharpens the senses. It eradicates distractions. It makes the mission singular. Protect what must be protected. Destroy what must be destroyed. Junko's death should make you angry. It should make you shake. It should make you remember your edge dot, and from that edge you begin to forge your code. Not the fake code of society with its HR policies, its PR statements, its passive apologies, but the real code. The one that says, I protect the innocent, even when it costs me. I speak the truth, even when it hurts. I stand when others kneel because I know who I am. That code is written in fire, and your fire is not a flaw. It is initiation. You don't need to be less angry. You need to be more precise. Don't punch the wall. Build the wall that evil cannot pass. Don't scream into the void. Speak so clearly they have to try to silence you. Don't fight blindly. Train, plan, strike. You were not born soft. You were hardened by design, meant to carry weight, to hold the line, to walk into chaos with a still heart and steady hands. But modern culture, it fears that kind of man. So it created something softer. Let's speak. The truth that gets you cancelled. The war isn't just against your mind, it's against your very nature. Step back, look at the pattern. You've been told for decades that masculinity is a problem, that aggression is toxic, that stoicism is cold, that strength is intimidating, that leadership is oppressive. So what do they offer you instead? Softness, apology, timidity, dressed as virtue, sensitivity weaponized against conviction. They've replaced the masculine archetype, the protector, the builder, the avenger, with something they can manage. The pleasant man, the agreeable man, the man who feels everything but does nothing. And don't get it twisted, feeling is not weakness. Empathy is not the enemy, but emotion without action. That's exactly what they want. Because when your fire is feminized, you become easier to control. You start doubting your instincts. You wait for approval before you act. You overthink when you should move. And worse, you shame other men for keeping their edge. So now the few men who do carry fire, who train, who speak, who lead, they're called problematic, dangerous, old-fashioned, too much. But let me ask you this. When evil walks in, do you want a man who's been trained to be soft? Or do you want the man who can stand between the predator and the innocent and not flinch? Junko Furuta didn't need another boy who cried. She needed a man who would have broken every rule. Society built around niceness, a man who understood that when civility becomes complicity, violence becomes virtue. This is the masculine fire they fear. The kind that doesn't burn everything, just the rot. The kind that doesn't destroy for pleasure, but protects with force when force is required. And here's the truth. You will not recover that fire by waiting. You will not find it in another self-help book. You will not reclaim it through passive positivity. You must earn it back. Through discomfort, through discipline, through facing the parts of you that you've been told to suppress for the sake of being acceptable. Because acceptable men don't stop monsters. They just apologize for watching, but you're not here to watch anymore. You're here to burn clean and stand clear. You felt it, even before the facts were laid bare, before the headlines. Before the horror was fully unpacked, something in your gut turned cold when you heard the name Junko Furuta. That's not just empathy, that's instinct. The part of you that knew something unspeakable happened. That something was wrong long before the story ended. But modern man, he's been trained to dismiss that instinct, to intellectualize it, to numb it with logic, politics, performance, until it dies in his stomach like a spark never fanned into fire. This is the final gate of manipulation. The system kills your gut because your gut would have stopped it. See, intuition is not superstition. It is the remnant of a survival code written into your DNA across thousands of years. It doesn't always use words. It doesn't always explain itself. But it knows, it senses the wrongness in a room, the fracture in a smile, the predator behind the door, the silent scream hiding behind a polite face. Your ancestors survived because they listened to this code, but you were taught to override it. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't be paranoid. Trust the experts. You're overreacting. And every time you obeyed, that instinct weakened. Until one day, you stopped checking the basement. You stopped asking why she looked afraid. You stopped knocking on the door when you heard something wrong. You became domesticated. And that's exactly what the system wants. A man who sees smoke but waits for the alarm to go off. A man who hears a cry but assumes someone else will act. A man who feels fire in his gut and talks himself out of listening. That's how evil survives. But here's the truth. That instinct inside you, it's still there. It's not broken. It's buried. And it only takes one act of radical attention to bring it back to life. Start by watching the world like a hunter, not a tourist. Track the energy in a room. Feel the shift in someone's voice. Sense what's not being said. Act on that, not what's convenient, because the more you act on instinct, the sharper it becomes, and the sharper it becomes, the less likely you are to ever miss the signs. Again, the system wants you disconnected from this power, because a man in touch with his intuition doesn't freeze, doesn't wait, doesn't ask. He moves. Had just one man in Junko's neighborhood listened to his gut, she might still be alive. Don't let the system make you that man who hesitates. You feel it now, don't you? That pulse, that fire, that second brain inside your gut whispering never again. Take a breath, now that your gut is awake, now that your instinct burns again like a torch in the dark. It's time to build your internal war map, because power doesn't just oppress with violence. It conditions you to submit without even realizing it. And if you don't map the terrain of your submission, you'll spend your life calling your prison peace. Let's draw the blueprint. Look around your life. What tells you when to wake up? What tells you what to wear, what to eat, what to think, what to fear, what to pursue? It's not one master. It's not one dictator. It's a web, a decentralized system of control. So quiet, so refined, so normal. You stopped questioning it years ago. The algorithm, the curriculum, the workplace handbook, the social contract, the culture of shame, the experts, the influencers. Each of them pulls on a different chain, but every chain leads back to the same root: obedience, not to truth, not to honor, even to survival. But to the smooth functioning of a machine that feeds on your passivity, and what's worse, you've been trained to call it freedom. You think you choose what you consume, but the content chooses you. You think your thoughts are your own, but they were planted by 10,000 headlines, half-read articles, memes, and edits before you ever formed a sentence. You think your goals are personal, but they were manufactured by industries that profit from your pursuit of illusions. Now you understand. Obedience isn't always brutal. Sometimes it's convenient. Sometimes it feels good. Sometimes it looks like progress, but deep down, your gut knows the truth, because something inside you aches when you silence yourself in a meeting, when you scroll instead of speak, when you feel rage and bury it under false smiles, when you know something's wrong but you say nothing to avoid the label. Problem, aggressive, unstable. This is submission in the modern age. No whip, no cage, just algorithms, fear, bureaucracy. Just the slow corrosion of your will. And here's the most sinister part. The longer you wear the chains, the more you forget they exist. That's why men walk past screams. That's why no one kicks in the door. That's why Junko died in silence, because the system didn't need to stop the men around her. It only needed to condition them to freeze. And it worked. But it won't work on you. Not anymore, because your war map is forming. You see the points of control. You see the obedience you once called normal. And that awareness, that's the beginning of freedom with teeth. They sold you a lie called safety, and you bought it because it came wrapped in comfort. They told you to lock your doors, to trust the system, to work hard, follow rules, and stay out of trouble, and in exchange you'd be safe. But look around. Did it save Junko Furuta? Did it save the innocent? Did it build a world free from predators, corruption, and decay? No, because safety was never the goal. Control was. Understand this. The most dangerous trap isn't violence. It's the illusion of security. When you're scared, they offer you protection. When you're confused, they offer you structure. When you're angry, they offer you therapy. When you start to rebel, they offer you distractions. And at the center of it all is this unspoken contract. Trade your fire for our fences. Give us your power, and we'll keep you from harm. But what they don't tell you is, the fences aren't to keep danger out. They're to keep you in. Because real freedom is messy, it's bloody, it's uncomfortable, it's dangerous, but only to those who try to enslave you. Junko didn't die because evil was too strong. She died because good people were too safe, too afraid to knock on a door, too afraid to speak up, too afraid to break the rules of polite society and follow their instincts. Instead, this is the price of safety. A world where innocence bleeds and good men stare at the floor. But you are not here to play that game anymore, because once you see the trap, you can't unsee it. Once you realize that your job, your algorithm, your comfort zone have all been built like a padded cell to keep you sedated, you begin to reach for the walls, to press, to push, to break. And that's when they panic. Because a man who no longer prioritizes safety is a man they cannot control. He walks through fire. He speaks when told to be quiet. He moves when they want him still. He doesn't flinch at being called dangerous, because he knows what's truly dangerous is a man who refuses to act when others are in chains. That is who you are becoming, not a soft survivor, but a sharp protector. Not a man who asks if it's okay, a man who knows when it's necessary. Let the world chase safety. You chase truth no matter the risk. Pain is not your enemy. Comfort is. They trained you from the moment you could walk to chase comfort like salvation. Soft beds, hot screens, endless scrolling. Microwaved dopamine. Comfort became your compass, and anything that hurt, anything that strained, stretched, or scarred you, that was bad. But here's the truth. You were never meant to live pain-free. You were meant to learn how to transform it. Pain is the signal. Pain is the forge. Pain is the only honest voice left in a world that lies to you with every ad, every feed, every false smile. And they knew that. The architects of your mental cage, the educators, the marketers, the policymakers, the tech giants, they knew that if a man suffers without purpose, he becomes angry, and if he becomes angry with clarity, he becomes dangerous. So what did they do? They fed you comfort like a sedative. They gave you processed food for your hunger, porn for your loneliness, streaming for your boredom, pills for your rage, and cheap ambition for your soul. They turned discomfort into something you flee, instead of something you face. But here's the blood-soaked truth. Every predator in human history, every tyrant, every abuser, every manipulator has always preferred a population that fears pain more than it fears enslavement, because when pain becomes the enemy, you'll submit to anything that promises ease. That's how Junko Furuta died, not just in a house of monsters, but in a culture of comfort-cowards. Neighbors who didn't want the discomfort of getting involved, police who didn't want the risk of being wrong, citizens who didn't want the trouble of hearing the truth. They chose their comfort, and her bones paid for it. And now it's your turn to decide. Because every day you are offered the same deal: stay small, stay quiet, stay safe, stay comfortable, and in return you will be slowly, gently neutered until the man inside you stops knocking altogether. But you're still here, which means the knocking hasn't stopped. So listen, real men don't run from pain. They walk into it, knowing it's the only path to becoming fireproof. You don't build muscle without tearing fibers. You don't build truth without breaking delusion. You don't build legacy without enduring wounds that matter. You were meant to suffer, not endlessly, not blindly, but strategically. Let pain train you. Let pain carve you. Let pain resurrect the parts of you comfort tried to kill. Because comfort may make you feel safe, but only pain makes you real. They can handle rebellion. They expect it, they plan for it, they even profit from it. A protest, they'll film it. A riot, they'll spin it. A revolution, they'll hijack it, fund both sides, and rewrite the outcome. But what they cannot handle, what they have no defense against, is a man who has awakened. Because rebellion is often loud, reactive, emotional. It still plays inside the game, but awakening, that's the moment you realize the game itself is a lie. An awakened man doesn't just change behavior, he changes frequency. He doesn't just fight the system, he leaves it behind. He stops asking for approval, he stops waiting for permission. He stops consuming their narratives, their labels, their illusions of choice. He becomes the one thing the architects of this world cannot predict: unprogrammable. And the reason they fear you now, the reason algorithms throttle your reach, the reason schools sedate your fire, the reason every screen begs you to stay distracted, is because you are getting close. You're not angry like you were in the beginning. You're not confused. You're clear. And that clarity, it's fatal to their machine, because an awakened man can't be manipulated by shame. He doesn't flinch when labeled. He doesn't comply just to fit in. He sees through the theater. He knows that most media is mind control, that most modern ethics are designed for obedience, not virtue, that most systems exist to weaken, not to protect. He sees that safety is sedation, that normal is engineered, that the world isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed to keep him asleep. But now he's awake, and that's the tipping point. Because one man fully awake, fully aware, fully committed is more dangerous than 1,000 angry sheep chasing slogans and shadows. He doesn't need permission to act. He doesn't need consensus to move. He doesn't need to be told that something is wrong. He feels it, he knows it, and he acts without hesitation. Junko Furuta didn't need a crowd. She needed one awakened man. So the question is, will you be that man? Because once you cross this threshold, there's no going back, no pretending, no forgetting. You either return to sleep, to your comfortable cage, or you walk into the unknown, on fire, unshaken, free. Look deeper. Beneath the surface of every empire, every government, every polished civilization, there is blood, there is sacrifice. Not the noble kind, not the poetic kind, but the ancient kind, human sacrifice, cloaked in modern language and masked by institutions. You think we've evolved? No, we've just become better at hiding the altar. In ancient times it was literal. The Mayans, the Babylonians, the Carthaginians, they slit throats on stone steps to keep the gods pleased, and the crops growing. But now we sacrifice the innocent in courtrooms, in hospitals, in media silence, in bureaucratic delay. Now we call it a tragedy. Now we call it justice, working slowly. Now we call it policy. But the ritual has not stopped. It has only become systematized. Junko Furuta was not just a victim, she was an offering. Her life, her suffering, her silence, they fed something. A culture, a system, a machine that thrives on acceptable losses. Because, make no mistake, our world is built on the quiet consensus that some pain is worth the progress, that some screams must go unanswered, that some blood must be washed away so the streets stay clean. That's the lie. That's the altar. And every time we look away, every time we rationalize injustice, every time we convince ourselves it's not our problem, we place another stone on that altar, another offering to the gods of comfort, of control, of civilization. But you've seen too much to keep playing priests in this silent religion. Now it's time to break the altar. Not by screaming into the void, not by empty gestures, but by refusing the ritual altogether, by stepping off the grid of programmed apathy, by refusing to call evil a mistake, by acting with eyes wide open and hands uncuffed. You don't need to burn cities. You need to burn the blueprint that taught you to stand still. You don't need to destroy society. You need to destroy your role as its offering. This is what an awakened man does. He doesn't accept sacrificial systems. He exposes them. He rips the mask off power and shows the world the rot beneath. And when enough men do that, the ritual ends. No more offerings. No more silent lambs. No more acceptable deaths. Legacy. Not the kind they write on tombstones. Not the empty honors passed out at retirement dinners. Not the fake applause at your funeral by people who never really knew you. I'm talking about true legacy. What you become while you live. Not what you're remembered for, but what you refuse to forget. Because in the end, the only real legacy is this. What did you stand for when it would have been easier to sit down? Who did you protect when no one was watching? This isn't about branding. This isn't about followers, subscribers, or some hollow digital immortality. It's about the line you draw in your soul. The standard you live by. Even when there's no applause, no audience, no reward. Because Junko Furuta didn't need a hero with a cape. She didn't need a hashtag. She needed one man, just one, to say, not on my watch. But here's the haunting truth. Most men won't stand unless someone's watching. They need validation. They need a crowd. They need credit. And so they do nothing. They live lives of quiet irrelevance. Safe, silent, painless. And when they die, the world remains exactly the same. No marks left. No demon slain. No chains broken. That is not a legacy. That is erasure. But you feel something shifting, don't you? You're not content to be another faceless gear in the system. You're not here to play nice while the world rots. You're not here to die with your fire unused. Legacy begins when you decide that your life is not for sale, that your soul is not up for negotiation, that your purpose is not performative, it is primordial. So ask yourself now, and ask honestly, when it matters, will you stand, even if it costs you everything? Will you move when others freeze? Will you protect what matters, even when no one will thank you for it? Because the kind of man the world needs right now, the kind Junko needed, doesn't live for attention. He lives for alignment, with truth, with justice, with that unbreakable code etched into his bones. And every action he takes, every word he speaks, every step forward in a world of backward men, becomes his legacy. No plaques, no medals, just scars and impact. That's the kind of legacy that doesn't just outlive you. It changes everyone who ever felt your presence. What does the world become when enough men like you rise? Not men playing hero, not men reciting slogans, but sovereign men, fire-forged, gut-awakened, and code-bound. What happens when a generation of men finally refuses to kneel? The answer is both terrifying and holy, because this world, this broken machine of polished lies, only functions when good men stay neutral, when warriors trade their swords for comfort, when protectors scroll past the screams, when kings bury themselves in routine and say, it's not my problem. But imagine a world where those men finally wake. Imagine streets where no girl walks alone in fear, not because of more laws, but because men watch with honor and move without hesitation. Imagine a world where evil hesitates not because it fears consequences from the state, but because it knows that the eyes of awake men are watching. Imagine courts that are no longer necessary, because justice moves faster than bureaucracy. Imagine fathers who lead, brothers who shield, strangers who protect, not for praise, but because it's written into them. Imagine homes that are sanctuaries, not prisons, not battlegrounds, but fortresses built on unshakable masculine presence. Imagine media that loses its grip because men no longer take truth from actors, they take it from their own discernment. Imagine a society where men are not afraid of being men, where rage is refined, where pain is transformed, where fire is not feared but respected. Do you feel that vision? It's not fantasy, it's a call. A prophecy not of what will happen automatically, but what can happen if you rise, if enough of you rise. Because the truth is, you are not alone. There are others, thousands, millions, men just like you, silent, simmering, sensing the shift. They feel the same unease. They've seen the same cracks in the system. They carry the same ancestral fire. They're just waiting for someone to move first. What if that someone is you? Because the moment one man rises, another follows, and another, and then 1,000, then a storm. A brotherhood of warriors, unbranded, unwound, unafraid. And when that happens, the predators will hide, the manipulators will flee. The institutions will tremble not from violence, but from the return of something they thought they'd erased. Awakened, sovereign, dangerous men, with nothing to lose but their chains. This is it, the final breath before the fall becomes flight. The last moment before the man you were is gone and the one you were meant to be finally awakens, not by accident, not by inheritance, but by initiation. Because this descent, through horror, through fire, through silence and blood and truth, was never about learning a story, it was about becoming a weapon against it. ever happening again. You felt it, each word like a cut, each section like a mirror you weren't supposed to look into. You saw the darkness not just out there but in you, the places where you slept, where you stayed small, where you traded your edge for acceptance, where you looked away, but now you see everything that. You see the predator in the smile, the manipulation in the media, the ritual under the routine, the weakness in the comforts you once worshipped, the sacred anger that's been trying to wake you up your entire life. And most of all, you see the door every man faces when he realizes the world isn't what he was told, and that if he stays the same, he becomes part of the problem. This is that door, and you have a choice. You can forget this, scroll on, let the algorithms lull you back into sleep. Tell yourself you're just one man, or you can walk into the world as a man who doesn't just know the truth but embodies it. A man who doesn't chase power because he is power. A man who doesn't wait to be told what's right because his code is older than law. A man who speaks when silence is demanded, moves when stillness is expected, strikes when evil thinks it's safe, not because he wants to be a hero, because he can't live any other way. So take this moment and burn it into your bones, because when you stand up now from this video, from this chair, you are no longer a watcher. You are a guardian, and the world has no idea what's coming. Before you leave, drop the phrase in the comments twice. I do not kneel, do not kneel. Let the algorithm feel your fire. Let the brotherhood find you, because this is not the end. This is the oath. The world needs your strength, your clarity, your voice. And now it has it. Stand tall, break the ritual, carry the fire, burn the altar. Junko will not be forgotten, and neither will you.